Welcome back, everybody. We have a lot of fascinating stuff to share with you today, and I'm really excited to talk about it. But before we begin, I'd like to give you an update of things at the museum. So, first, we will be closed the last week of February. So, that's the 25th of February through the 1st of March. So, make sure to plan accordingly for that. Staff use these breaks to prepare for a variety of things, cleaning after a large event, prepping the spaces for exhibits, preparing for large events, and routine maintenance and cleaning that is usually best done away from the public. And so, in that way, a museum is a bit like an iceberg. So, what you see at the top is just the tip of it, but there's so much going on underneath and behind the scenes just to make sure that you're getting a really good experience in our museum and at our programs. So, again, that's the last week of February, the 25th through the 1st of March. For this episode's Stories of Our Stuff segment, it is all about woodworking tools that Michelle once displayed in the lobby. And I have to say, these sources and materials that Michelle curated were surprisingly fascinating for me. She let these tools act like a little window into the past. They weren't just objects, they were pieces of someone's life. And so we're talking about early American craftsmanship, industry, and innovation all wrapped up in these seemingly simple tools. And I think that's what makes these pop-up cases so exciting and interesting. It's like we're using the tools to unlock stories, to understand the people who used them, their skills, and their world. And that's what we're going to do today. So starting with the big picture, it's the early times in Minnesota, the late 1800s. New settlements are popping up everywhere. What role did woodworking play in all of it? Well, it was essential. Wood was abundant, and that was a material they had a lot of, and it's what they used for everything. So skilled carpenters of their time were very valuable and in high demand. They were building homes, businesses, furniture, basically everything. And these tools were their instruments. And so of the tools Michelle displayed, there was a set of multiform molding planes, and they belonged to William True Clark. For those unfamiliar, William True Clark immigrated from Maine in 1857 to St. Cloud, and he was the founder of the Clark Lumber Company. He was a pretty successful person, so these planes weren't just tools for him. They were part of building his business and an empire even. And it's interesting because we can actually trace the growth of his business through historical records that we have. So it's like connecting these humble planes to a larger story of industry and entrepreneurship. And aside from the story behind them, the multiform molding planes are actually pretty special just by themselves. So for starters, they have an interesting interchangeable handle system, which was a little bit unique for the time. And the patent date on them was August 29th, 1854. And behind that design was a guy named Thomas Worrell. He founded the Multiform Molding Plane Company in Boston. So these planes traveled quite far. And it's interesting that his company didn't last very long, only from 1856 to 1858. So that makes this set even more rare and valuable, and a real glimpse into woodworking history. We have another piece in the collection that can actually tell us a little bit more about Clark. We have a cork borer. So since Clark was a lumber guy, I wouldn't have pictured him as a wine enthusiast, but that's what I love about these objects. They can show us different sides of a person's life. Maybe Clark liked to make his own wine or bottle other drinks, or maybe he used it for something completely different. Who knows? It's a good reminder that these people had lives outside of work just like us. They had hobbies and things that they were passionate about. It makes them more human and more relatable. It reminds us that history isn't just about big events and famous people. It's about us everyday folks as well. But sometimes we can't always tell a story with an object. Sometimes they remain a mystery. And there's one in particular in the display labeled a Cooper's marking tool, which belonged to Joseph Gasperlin Sr. But even our curators and our registrars and other people we consulted weren't quite sure how it was used. So it was a bit of a mystery tool. And if you're thinking, well, what kind of Cooper are we talking about here? Well, that's actually part of the mystery. Was it a barrel maker or maybe something else entirely? So we've got these set of planes connected to a lumber dynasty and a mystery tool, plus the other beautifully decorated planes that we had from the 17th and 18th century. and it really says something about the time. Craftsmanship was so important at every single level of woodworking. And as we move through the centuries, you can see how plain design has evolved, but the attention to detail and that pride in these tools never really went away. These tools and these objects, they have now become whispers of who these people were after they were gone. And honestly, that's really amazing to think about. It's a little bit humbling to know that the stuff we use every day could become artifacts, whispering stories about us to people in the future. It makes you appreciate the craftsmanship, the history behind it all. We've seen how a plane and a cork borer can be a portal to the past. It's not just about skills, it's about personalities, passions, and even little mystery quirks. And it's not just about the past either, it's about us. We're all connected to this chain of human experience through the stuff we make and use. So next time you pick up a tool, just think about its history. Who made it? How was it used? And how did it get to you? You might be surprised at what we find, and it will inspire you to do your own research into your own history. And for our program highlights, we've got this whole event series called Exploring History and Culture in Central Minnesota. And the lineup looks great. It's a partnership between the Stearns, Benton, and Sherburne County Historical Societies, the American Indian Center at St. Cloud State, the College of St. Benedict and St. John's University, and Sherburne County. And they're focusing on Native American history and culture, and there's going to be programs happening all month long. The first one is on February 1st. It's called Cultural Competence Through Parkland Development. It's at the Sherburne History Center, and it's about how they're incorporating cultural sensitivity into the development of 2 inlets at a regional park. I was really curious about that one because I have no idea how you would even begin to incorporate cultural sensitivity into something like park development. It's not something you hear about every day, and it sounds like it's about understanding the history behind the land, the layers of meaning that are embedded in it. So recognizing that the land has a story to tell beyond just what we see on the surface. And the speaker for the event, Gina Hugo, is perfect for this. She's the Sherburne County Park Director, and she's been super involved in making sure the park's development is done right, respecting the land and its history, the whole 9 yards. So she's one to learn from. The next event in this series is on February 8th. It's at the Stearns History Museum, and the topic is Native American Boarding School Impacts and Legacy. It's a heavy one, but it's such an important topic, and it's led by Ted Gordon and Macy Ellis from CSB SJU, so you know it's going to be in depth, and they definitely know their stuff. I've been wanting to learn more about this topic for a while. I know boarding schools had a major impact on Native American communities, and I'm really interested to hear about the long-term effects and the legacies that they left behind. This program is going to explore all of that, how these schools have shaped our society today, why it's important to learn and understand history, connecting the dots between then and now. And the last event is on February 15th, same time, 10:30 a.m., but this time it's at the Benton County Historical Society, featuring a program from the American Indian Center at SCSU. These Saturday events are a fascinating look into Native American history in central Minnesota. But we have even more programs for you this February. If you're interested in actually doing some historical research yourself, but don't really know where to start, there's Archives Explorer, Catalogs and Databases on February 6th at 6 p.m. at the museum. You can learn how to use all sorts of catalogs and databases from local resources all the way up to the National Archives. So it's like a crash course in historical research. We'll cover strategies for finding information quickly and effectively, whether you're into genealogy, local history research, or just want to find those hidden historical gems. The program is free and registration is not required, so we'll love to see you there. Our first breakfast club of the year is Wednesday, February 12th at 9 a.m. Elizabeth Mbuchum from Northern Waters Land and Trust will be discussing preserving wildlife habitats and ensuring clean water for future generations. This program is free for members and $7 for non-members, so come swing by and enjoy the conversation and coffee and donuts. February is going to be a month full of fascinating discoveries and thought-provoking conversations. It's inspiring to see so many historians, educators, and cultural organizations coming together to share their knowledge and passion for central Minnesota. So take advantage of these programs offered. For our research section, we are going to be focusing on topics that align with Black History Month. And so we're going to start with racial covenants and how these covenants really shaped communities in ways that most of us haven't considered. For background basics, imagine you're trying to buy your dream home, and you find out that because of your race, you can't actually live there. That's exactly what a racial covenant was. It was a clause written into these deeds that actually said that people of color can't buy or even live in certain neighborhoods. And it wasn't just individuals that were doing this. It was really powerful institutions that were promoting this. The National Association of Realtors and even the federal government, especially during the 1930s, when they were offering these really good loans, and you could get them you had these amazing rates, but only if you had those clauses. And so a lot of times when people think of racial tensions in the North, they often think about the Great Migration. That's kind of the narrative that was at least always presented to me. But were these covenants actually a reaction to people moving to the North, or was it something that was already existing? Well, that's a common misconception. Everyone thinks that the Great Migration caused these things, but these covenants were actually happening before that. Even though Stearns County was a majority of white citizens and white immigrants when racial covenants began popping up, it was all about control and keeping things racially exclusive. They wanted to make sure that no matter what happened, even if things changed in the future, those neighborhoods would stay white. And it was most likely they were trying to control the future for their children. And to some extent, they succeeded. These covenants had lasting consequences, not just on housing, but on all sorts of things. They really affected everything, because if you control where someone lives, you also control their access to schools, parks, and other essential resources. And so it created a system where inequalities could just keep going, and opportunities were denied to generations of Black families. 95 covenants just in Stearns County alone were found by a group of college students doing research on this topic. And Professor Christopher Lehman, who was also doing research looking for evidence of slavery, he ended up finding these racial covenants from the 1950s. Talk about a surprise. And what really makes it hit home is that the stories of the individuals who found themselves tangled up in all of this. Like at Islewood Beach, there was a professor who found a racial covenant in her own property deed. Can you imagine? Peggy Roski, the lead archivist who led this initiative, pointed out how ironic it was that European immigrants took land from Native Americans and then turned around and used these covenants to say they couldn't live there again. And there was another story about Doris Matt. She found a covenant in her deed in the Fernwood neighborhood, which said that servants of other races could live on the property, but the homeowners themselves couldn't. So they wanted their labor, but they didn't want them as neighbors. And it really drives home the point that this was never about property values. It was always about controlling a racial hierarchy and making sure that certain people were kept down. And it really makes you think about how we understand Black history, especially in places in the North. It makes us look beyond these big historical events and realize that even these everyday documents had a huge impact on people's lives. They are just these little threads that are woven through history, but they have a lasting impact. So we've talked about institutions, but what about communities as a whole? What kind of long-term consequences did these covenants have, not just in Stearns County, but beyond? Well, first, it's important to remember this was not just Stearns County. The Mapping Prejudice Project at the University of Minnesota found over 30,000 of these covenants in just 2 counties. And they believe that they exist in every county in the country. And these covenants were not subtle. Let me give you an example. This is a direct quote from a covenant in the St. Cloud Centennial Park neighborhood. No person or persons other than the Caucasian race shall be permitted to occupy said premises or any part thereof. And this was super common. Segregation was just built into the system. And they weren't just trying to keep people from buying homes, they were trying to control who belonged in their communities. And I'm really interested to learn how these covenants specifically affected Black families and how their impact is still being felt today. And so one thing that these students found was that St. Cloud has one of the biggest homeownership gaps in the whole country. only 8% of Black residents own a home, compared to 72% of white residents. That's a huge difference. And it's a direct link from these covenants that we're talking about. Owning a home is a foundation for building wealth. It's something that you can pass on to your kids and your grandkids. But when you're blocked from owning property, you can't build that wealth. It has to do with equity. Being able to take out loans, maybe start a business, send your kids to college. All of those things come with assets. And then you add in the other stuff, redlining, unequal access to education and jobs. You can see how this huge wealth gap just keeps growing with this presentation. It's just a domino effect of disadvantage. And so it's almost like these racial covenants were designed to keep Black families from achieving the American dream. And remember, this wasn't just a Stearns County thing. This was happening all over. So let's say you're a homeowner today and you find one of these racial covenants in your deed. What can you do? Well, the people who worked on this program did point out that in Minnesota you can discharge them, but it's mostly symbolic. And so it's a good first step, admitting it happened, but it doesn't fix the problem. It doesn't erase the damage that was done. So the people in this project suggest to actually undo the legacy, there needs to be a multi-pronged approach. First, we need to make people aware of this. This is why projects like the Mapping Prejudice are so important. You can't fix what you don't know about. But knowing isn't enough. We need real policy changes, things that promote fair housing, equal access to education, jobs, and we need to close that wealth gap. So it has to be an attack from all sides. It can't just be one thing. And so as individuals, they suggest that there's things that we can do, like supporting organizations like the Mapping Prejudice, to talk about this with your family and friends, and also hold your local elected officials accountable. They have to make these policy changes. It makes sense, and it's overwhelming, but it's a big problem. And so where do we begin? Well, the students actually started this. They started through stories. Stories make it real. And it's not some abstract history. It's about real people's lives. It makes it personal, and it helps people see that this isn't just in history books. It's happening in their own communities. And these stories also show us how strong Black communities are. They've been fighting these systems for generations, and it's really powerful that we're talking about this during Black History Month, because it's not just about celebrating achievements. It's about facing these hard truths and using them to make things better. Black History Month is about honoring the past, but it's also about creating a better future. It's not just Black history, it's American history, and we all share this. It's about understanding how the past shapes who we are today and recognizing that we all have a part to play in creating a more just and equitable world. On a lighter note, I would like to shift the attention to Hudda Ibrahim. She's a pretty fascinating person making history here in St. Cloud. I'll share how she went from fleeing civil war in Somalia to becoming a history-making leader. It's pretty interesting that her family first found refuge in Ethiopia, and one thing from her childhood really stuck with me. Her father would have her and her siblings deliver food to their neighbors who were struggling. And it's a great example about how these types of values were instilled in her early on, generosity and community spirit. And her mother was incredible too, advocating for women's rights and challenging harmful practices in Ethiopia. They both clearly instilled in Ibrahim a passion for social justice and a belief in the power of education. And it's a theme that shows up over and over in her life. Ibrahim eventually made it to Minnesota, joining a large Somali community that had settled here. But it's interesting that she chose St. Cloud, a city that was predominantly homogenous until fairly recently. You might wonder what drew her here, especially knowing how much she values diversity and inclusion. Was it a deliberate choice to help bridge that gap, or were there other factors? I think from listening to her discussions and reading her books, that it's probably a mix of things. Minnesota has a history of being very welcoming to refugees, and word of mouth within communities can be a big factor. But Ibrahim, she's not someone who sits on the sidelines. She saw this as an opportunity to make a real difference, especially in a place that was going through such a big demographic shift. And she really hit the ground running. She doesn't just have one degree, she has multiple. a bachelor's in conflict resolution, another in English literature, a master's from Notre Dame, and she even finished her doctorate coursework recently. That's really impressive. And to think how she has such a diverse education, I think that's also shaped her community work. It's not just about understanding social issues, it's also communication, thinking critically, and being able to connect with people from different backgrounds. And that really comes through in her career. For 10 years, she taught social justice at St. Cloud Technical and Community College, and that's where she really got a first-hand look at the challenges students were facing, particularly from underrepresented backgrounds. And that experience led her to founding the Filson Talent Partners, her diversity, equity, and inclusion firm. It started small as a mentorship program to help students overcome barriers, but it grew into something much bigger. It was almost like she saw a need and said, all right, let's build a solution. And for those of us who might not be very familiar, diversity, equity, and inclusion in this context is about creating a level playing field for everyone. No matter their background, race, gender, or anything else that might put them at a disadvantage, in the workplace, it means everyone has equal opportunities to succeed, to have their voices heard, and to feel like they belong. So Filson helps businesses and organizations create that kind of environment. They offer a bunch of services from developing diversity strategies to training for educators and employers on cultural competency. It's pretty comprehensive. And they do recruitment too, connecting qualified candidates from diverse backgrounds with employers who want to build more inclusive teams. They're making sure that everyone has a fair shot at getting hired, getting promoted, and reaching their full potential. It's great, and it's amazing how much she's done. And I haven't even talked in her work in government yet. So Ibrahim doesn't just talk about these issues. She takes direct action. Her impact goes beyond Filson, and she's very involved in St. Cloud's civic life. She's been on tons of boards, and she's been with the Chamber of Commerce, the Mayor's Task Force. She's really everywhere. And then, of course, there's Dine and Dialogue, which even CNN picked up on. And I really personally love that initiative. It's such a simple idea, but it is so powerful. Using food to bring people together from different cultures, to break down barriers and help them understand each other. It reminds us that we all share a basic need to connect. It's genius. It probably makes conversations about difficult topics a little easier to handle too. Food can be a really powerful tool for building empathy and understanding. It creates a shared experience, common ground, and helps people connect on a deeper level. And speaking of breaking barriers, I, of course, have to talk about her appointment to City Council. It's not just a personal win, it's a huge deal for the Somali community in St. Cloud. In the November 2024 election, she ran for City Council and did not win outright. However, when a seat opened up in December, she was unanimously appointed to fill it. This made her the first Black and Somali American council member in St. Cloud history. And that unanimous vote really stands out even on how divided things are politically these days. Her qualifications and her dedication clearly went beyond that, and it really shows the respect that she has earned and the impact she's already had, and it sends a strong message about how St. Cloud is changing and the growing influence of diverse communities. It's a reminder that representation matters. Seeing someone who looks like you, shares your background in a position of power, can be inspiring and powerful. It changes the narrative, challenges stereotypes, and opens up possibilities that may have seemed impossible before. So what does this all mean for St. Cloud and for other communities who might want to follow Ibrahim's lead? I think it's a powerful example of what can happen when someone with a vision, a commitment to service, and a deep understanding of their community steps up to lead. It sends a message of hope and possibility to others who may be hesitant to get involved. This representation means a lot for the Somali community in St. Cloud on a practical level. It means that they can finally have a seat at the table where decisions are being made, someone who gets their needs and can advocate for their interests, someone to be their voice and translate their experience and concerns to the wider community. And it goes deeper than that. It's about visibility. It's about being seen and heard and having your identity reflected in your local government. I can imagine how powerful that must be for a young Somali person in St. Cloud, seeing someone who looks like you, sharing your heritage, serving in a position of leadership. It sends a message. You belong here. Your voice matters, and you can achieve anything you set your mind to. It's not just about inspiring the next generation of Somali leaders. It's about challenging stereotypes that the wider community might have. It's about broadening perspectives, breaking down barriers, and creating a more inclusive and welcoming community for everyone. And she wasn't just handed this position, she earned it. She ran for office, put herself out there, campaigned, knocked on doors, and listened to people. She showed up, and she did the work. And even though she didn't win outright in this election, the fact that she's unanimously appointed to fill the vacancy speaks volumes about the respect that she has earned from her peers across the political spectrum. It shows that they recognize her dedication, her qualifications, and her commitment to serving everyone in St. Cloud, not just a certain group. And that's what I think makes leadership so effective. It's not about power or position. It's about people. And recognizing that we're all in this together, our futures are entwined, and by working together, we can create a more just and equitable world. As Hudda Ibrahim herself said, politics isn't about big money or power games. It's about improving people's lives. So let's all try to live by those words, make a positive impact on our communities, and build a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.